My girlfriend left me for a fake rich man after her family said I'd never be enough. Now, she's back. The moment I saw the luxury car pull up in front of my apartment, my heart sank so hard I thought it might stop. I'm Jake, 28 years old, and for the past 2 years, I've been trying to build a life with Emily, the woman I thought was my future. But it all started to unravel the day her family made it clear I wasn't the man she deserved. I live in a cramped second-floor flat downtown, the kind of place where the peeling paint on the walls and the rattling pipes remind you every day how far you've got to go. Emily used to love it. The way the morning sunlight hit the cracked window pane and the smell of fresh coffee brewing in my tiny kitchen. But over time, her visits became less about us and more about checking her phone, glossing over my worn-out furniture, and smiling at messages from people who wore suits and drove cars I could only dream of. Her family was always there, hovering with thinly veiled judgment. I remember the way her father's eyes flicked over my faded sneakers and wrinkled shirt when we met for dinner. Her mother's lips pressed into a tight line every time I tried to explain my modest plans for the future. They didn't say it outright, but I felt it in every glance. I was never enough. Not ambitious enough. Not rich enough. Not good enough. Emily started to change, too. She stopped calling me in the mornings, stopped asking about my day. When we were together, her smile felt forced, like she was holding back a secret. She began disappearing for hours, returning with expensive perfumes I couldn't afford. Stories about a man who had everything I didn't. She said he was just a friend, but the way she avoided my eyes told me the truth. I tried to hold on, to prove I could be the man she wanted. But one night, after a dinner I'd cooked, burnt pasta and all, she told me she was leaving. For someone else. Someone who looked the part her family demanded. The pain was raw, but what stung worse was the cold certainty that her family's words had pushed her away. Now, months later, that same luxury car is parked outside my door, and I'm standing frozen with the past crashing down on me. The doorbell rings, sharp and insistent. I don't know what to expect, but I know this is far from over. The doorbell's chime fades, swallowed by the quiet that's become my constant companion. I sink onto the edge of my couch, the fabric worn thin where I always sit, and stare at the chipped coffee table cluttered with unopened mail and empty mugs. It's the silence between us that's always been the loudest thing, louder than any argument or harsh word. I remember the nights when Emily would curl up beside me, her breath warm against my neck, and how those moments have shrunk to memory, replaced by the cold distance I can't quite name. I trace the faded ring on the table, a souvenir from the mug she used to bring me every morning, before her smile started to feel like polite lies. That's when I first noticed. The way she'd glance at her phone under the table during dinner, her fingers dancing over the screen with a nervous energy I couldn't crack. It wasn't just distraction, it was a quiet withdrawal. One evening, I caught her watching me through a cracked doorframe, her eyes flickering with something I couldn't place. Pity. Doubt. I never got close enough to find out. The apartment, once our shared refuge, became a gallery of unattended moments. Her coat left hanging by the door, untouched for days, the scent fading. The kitchen, where I'd tried to cook meals that fell short of perfect, filled with the echo of her absence. I recall the night I stayed up waiting, the clock's red digits burning into the dark, while she disappeared into a world where I wasn't invited. The sound of her heels clicking on the pavement outside, a rhythmic reminder that I was no longer the center of her universe. Her family's quiet judgments seeped into every corner of our lives. I remember the way her mother's eyes skimmed past me at holiday dinners, stopping just long enough to remind me I was invisible. The subtle shift when Emily's phone lit up with messages from someone else, texts she'd shield from my view, laughter that didn't reach her eyes when she was near me. Each small act, a folded arm, averted gaze, a silenced phone call, was a stitch in the growing rift between us. I began to feel like a ghost in my own home, a spectator to a life that had moved on without me. The exhaustion wasn't just physical, it sank into my bones, a heaviness that made getting up in the morning a battle. I caught myself shrinking away during conversations, my voice quieter, my presence smaller. The man I was trying to be seemed to slip further out of reach, replaced by someone who waited in the shadows, too tired to fight, too confused to understand. Tonight, standing in the dim light of my apartment, I realize something has shifted beneath the surface. The past, once a weight I carried with hope, now feels like a stranger watching from the doorway. And when the doorbell rings again, sharp and unyielding, I know that whatever comes next won't be the same. Something fundamental has changed, something I'm only beginning to see. The knock came soft, hesitant, almost polite, before the door creaked open just enough to reveal Emily's silhouette. I hadn't expected her to come back, not like this. And yet there she was, framed by the dim hallway light, holding a small box. I stood frozen, my palms sweaty against the rough wood of the doorframe, heart hammering so loud I thought she might hear it. She stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, the scent of expensive perfume trailing behind her like a shadow. The box was light in her hands, but the weight of what it contained slammed into me before she even spoke. "I thought you should have this," she said quietly, placing it on the coffee table with a deliberate calm that made my chest tighten. I opened it slowly, fingers trembling. Inside was a collection of photos, pictures I hadn't seen before, of her and the man she left me for. Not just casual snapshots, but moments that spoke of intimacy. His arm wrapped around her waist, their heads pressed together in laughter. A dinner setting too elegant for my small kitchen. Smiles that weren't meant for me. The edges of the photos curled slightly, as if they'd been handled often. Treasured in a way I never was. Emily's eyes didn't meet mine. Instead, she looked past me, her voice barely above a whisper. "I wanted to believe I could make it work with you. I really did. But my family was right. You weren't enough. And I needed to stop pretending otherwise." The words hit me like a fist to the stomach. I felt my knees weaken, and I sank onto the couch, the worn cushions offering little comfort. My hands clenched into fists, nails biting into my palms, trying to find something solid in the whirlwind of shock and betrayal swirling inside me. She sat down across from me, the distance between us suddenly vast and unbridgeable. The air felt thick, heavy with everything unsaid, with the truth I'd avoided for too long. I wanted to ask why now, why this sudden return, but my throat tightened, swallowing the question whole. A sudden buzz pulled my attention, a message lighting up her phone on the table. I caught a glimpse of the screen before she snatched it away. A new text from the same man, promising a weekend getaway I wasn't part of. The stark contrast between her present and my reality was a punch I couldn't dodge. I looked back at Emily, searching her face for a trace of the woman I thought I knew. But the distance in her eyes was unmistakable, resignation and something colder, like a door closing softly but firmly. In that moment, the fragile hope I'd clung to shattered completely. I reached out, fingers brushing against the box on the table, the glossy photos beneath my skin like shards of glass. My breath hitched, chest tight, and a numbness spread through my limbs. The truth settled over me, undeniable and final. She left again without another word, and as the door clicked shut behind her, I realized I could no longer pretend. The story we had lived was over. The man I thought I was wasn't the man she wanted, and maybe, deep down, never could be. Days passed after Emily's visit, but the weight she left behind didn't fade. It settled into the cracks of my routine, seeping into every corner of my restless mind. I tried to keep busy, diving into work and late-night runs through the city streets. But the sharp sting of that box, those photos, haunted me like a half-remembered nightmare. Yet, beneath the ache, a gnawing suspicion began to grow, knotting itself tighter with each passing hour. One evening, as I returned home, I caught sight of a familiar black car idling near my building. Too familiar, because it was the same car I'd seen before. The one Emily's fake rich man drove. It wasn't just a coincidence anymore. The vehicle lingered like a silent threat, parked too long, as if staking a claim on the streets I called home. I watched from the shadows as a suited man stepped out, his smile too polished, eyes scanning the neighborhood with a cold assurance that made my skin crawl. Inside my apartment, the phone buzzed relentlessly. Messages from unknown numbers, some curt, others dripping with warning. I hesitated before opening one that simply read, "You're in over your head." The words felt less like a threat and more like a declaration, a line drawn in the sand I hadn't even seen until it was too late. Emily's name flickered on the screen shortly after, but her texts were distant, clipped, and sterile, a stark contrast to the warmth I'd once known. She asked about moving on, about finding better, but each message felt like a stone thrown across a chasm I couldn't cross. The most jarring moment came when I bumped into one of Emily's acquaintances at a downtown cafe. Her voice was familiar, but her eyes held a guarded shimmer, and when our gazes met, she quickly looked away, mumbling something about complications and not wanting to get involved. The encounter was brief, but the coldness lingered, an unspoken warning that I was treading on dangerous ground, tangled in a web woven by people who didn't want me there. At home, the atmosphere thickened with neglect. The small comforts I'd built, a favorite mug, a worn-out sweater Emily once left behind, felt like relics from a life I was no longer a part of. The apartment, once a sanctuary, echoed emptier now, shadows stretching longer in the fading light. Even the walls seemed to close in, whispering reminders of promises broken and trust betrayed. One night, I found myself staring at the cracked ceiling, the silence broken only by the distant hum of the city. My phone vibrated again, the screen flashing a message from Emily. "We need to talk." My fingers hovered over the screen, heart pounding, mind racing with doubts and fears. Was this a chance for closure, a cruel manipulation, or something else entirely? The uncertainty wrapped around me like a fog I couldn't shake. As I pocketed the phone, I caught movement outside the window, a shadow slipping away into the night, quick and deliberate. The street lamp flickered, casting shifting light over the empty sidewalk. In that fleeting moment, the fragile calm shattered, replaced by a pulse of tension that tightened in my chest. Something was coming, something I could no longer ignore. And in the silence that followed, I realized I was no longer just waiting. I was standing on the edge of a storm about to break. The night Emily said, "We need to talk," I knew the calm was over. The city buzzed outside my window, but inside, my apartment felt like a pressure cooker about to blow. I met her at a quiet bar downtown, the kind of place where the dim lighting hides more than it reveals, and every shadow seemed to stretch longer than it should. She was already there when I arrived, sitting stiffly at a corner table, eyes flickering with a mix of regret and something colder. Detachment, maybe. The scent of her perfume was faint, but unmistakable, a reminder of what had been and what was slipping away. I swallowed hard, the knot in my stomach tightening as I took the seat opposite her. "Jake," she started, voice brittle. "I didn't come back to hurt you. But things aren't what you think." I wanted to believe her, but the photos, the messages, the car, all the pieces didn't fit into any story that spared me. My voice cracked when I asked, "Then why come back at all? What do you want from me now?" She hesitated, eyes darting to the entrance as if expecting someone. "It's complicated. You don't know the whole truth about him. About us." Before I could press further, the door swung open with a jarring bang. The man, slick and sharp in an expensive suit, walked in, eyes locking onto me like a predator spotting competition. The air shifted instantly. The room felt smaller, heavier. Emily's hand twitched on the table, almost reaching for mine but stopping short. "This is him," I demanded, voice rising despite myself. He smiled, slow and confident, sliding into the seat beside Emily. "Jake," he said, voice smooth but edged with something dangerous. "I've heard a lot about you." I met his gaze, trying to mask the surge of anger and fear that stabbed through me. "You're nothing but a con man." She left me for a lie. He leaned in, voice low enough for only me to hear. "What she wants. It's not about money or status. It's about survival. You wouldn't understand." Emily's eyes flicked between us, torn. "Jake, I never wanted this to be a fight. But you have to see, this world isn't kind to people like us." The words hit me like ice. The man's presence was a living reminder of everything I'd lost, the family's judgment, Emily's cold departure. But beneath the hurt, a quiet fury rose in me. I wasn't going to fade into the background anymore. "I don't care about your games," I said, standing abruptly, chair scraping harshly against the floor. "I'm done watching you both pretend. If this is the life she wants, then fine. But I'm not the one who's fake." Emily's face crumpled for a moment, then hardened again. "Maybe you're right. Maybe this is the end." The man stood too, towering, his smirk a challenge. "Walk away, Jake. Before this gets ugly." I swallowed my fear, heart pounding like a drum in my chest. The bar's laughter and clinking glasses felt miles away, irrelevant to the storm unfolding in front of me. I took a step toward the door, then stopped, the weight of the moment crashing down. Leave it all behind. Fight for something I might never have. The choice burned hot, impossible to ignore. Outside, the night waited, dark and endless. And inside me, the question screamed louder than ever. What now? The morning light cut through the blinds in sharp lines, but I pulled the curtains tighter, wanting less of the world and more of the quiet I craved. The apartment felt smaller now, every corner a reminder of the bar, the man, and Emily's cold departure. I stopped sitting an hour spot on the couch, choosing the farthest chair instead, where I could fold myself into a tight shell and watch the room without really being in it. Breakfast became a silent affair. I'd pour black coffee into a chipped mug, no cream, no sugar, and nibble on stale toast I barely tasted. The clink of the spoon against the mug was the only sound, a small punctuation in the heavy quiet. I caught myself staring at the empty chair across the table. Once hers, now a hollow space I didn't know how to fill. The kitchen, which used to smell like hope and burnt pasta experiments, now just smelled like loneliness and the faint scent of old coffee. I started leaving earlier for work, long before the rush hour, blending into the empty streets as if slipping through cracks in the city. The brisk morning air bit at my skin, but it was better than facing the silence waiting at home. At the office, my co-workers' casual greetings felt distant, like echoes from another life. I kept my head down, fingers tapping out reports with mechanical precision, too tired to argue or explain. I stopped talking about Emily or the weekend. The words stuck in my throat, refused to come out. Some nights, I found myself wandering the city alone, walking without direction, hands shoved deep into the pockets of my worn jacket, shoulders hunched against the cold. The neon signs blurred as my eyes grew tired, but I kept moving, chasing something I couldn't name. Occasionally, I'd stop in front of a diner or a late-night cafe, ordering a coffee just to sit for a while, watching strangers live lives that no longer felt like mine. My phone stayed silent more often than not, the screen dark except for the occasional message from my brother, a voice of steady concern. I didn't ask for advice, didn't explain the mess inside me. But one night, after a particularly rough day, I broke down and texted him, "Can we talk?" The reply came almost immediately, warm and steady. It was the first real connection I'd allowed myself in weeks. At home, I avoided the living room, the place where the box of photos had sat like a wound. Instead, I retreated to the bedroom, closing the door behind me and shutting out the memories. Sometimes I'd lie on the bed, staring at the ceiling, tracing cracks and shadows, willing the pain to dull. Other times, I paced the room, fists clenched, anger simmering just beneath the surface. Not at Emily, not exactly, but at the whole tangled mess of expectations, lies, and lost dreams. One evening, as I stood at the window watching the rain blur the city lights, I caught my reflection in the glass. Haggard, eyes too tired to hide the hurt. For the first time, I didn't look away. There was something there, beneath the exhaustion and the anger, a faint flicker, fragile and uncertain. Maybe it was the realization that I couldn't stay buried forever. Maybe it was the tiniest spark of wanting to find out who I was without her, without their judgments. I didn't know what came next, but as the rain fell softly against the glass, I felt something shift, a quiet, shaky step away from the edge, toward a place I couldn't see yet, and for now, that was enough. The next morning, I found myself staring at the blank notebook my brother had slipped through the door the night before, its crisp pages waiting silently. He'd written a note on the first page. "For whatever's inside your head, sometimes it helps to get it out." I hesitated, fingers grazing the cover as if it were a fragile lifeline. Then, with a slow breath, I flipped it open and scribbled the first messy sentence. It was awkward at first, words stumbling over one another, but each line felt like a small crack breaking through the armor I'd built around myself. Later that day, I called the number for a local therapist I'd found online. The voice on the other end was kind but professional, and setting the appointment felt like stepping into a new world I wasn't sure I belonged to yet. Still, I told myself this was about more than Emily or her family's judgments. It was about me, about learning to stand on my own again. That evening, I met up with Sam, an old friend I hadn't seen in months. We sat in a bustling cafe, the air thick with the smell of roasted coffee and chatter. At first, the conversation was stilted. Small talk about work, the city, the weather. But gradually, I let slip pieces of my story. Sam listened without interrupting, eyes steady and unjudging. When I finished, he didn't offer cliches or quick fixes. Instead, he just nodded and said, "You're stronger than you think, Jake. But you've got to stop letting their voices drown out your own." It was a simple thing, but hearing someone acknowledge that made the weight inside me shift just a little. The next morning, I resisted the usual urge to check my phone the moment I woke. Instead, I went for a run through the park, the cold air sharp in my lungs, the rhythm of my feet pounding on the path grounding me. I passed a group of joggers laughing together, and for a moment, I wondered what it would be like to be part of something like that again. Not just a spectator, but someone who belonged. The thought was both terrifying and oddly thrilling. When I got home, I cleared off the coffee table, the photos, the unopened mail, the lingering reminders, and wiped the surface clean. It was a small act, but it felt like reclaiming a piece of my space, a declaration that this apartment wasn't just a museum of lost moments anymore. Later that week, I found myself setting a boundary I hadn't dared to before. When Emily texted again, her words cold and distant, asking if we could meet, I paused. The old part of me wanted to answer immediately, to chase closure or answers. But this time, I typed back, "I need some space right now. I hope you understand." Sending the message sent a jolt through me, equal parts relief and guilt. But I knew it was necessary. That night, lying in bed, I felt the familiar ache settle in. But beneath it, a steady pulse of something new. Maybe self-respect, maybe courage. It wasn't a clean break from the past, nor an easy path forward. But it was a start. And as sleep finally claimed me, I held on to one thought, fragile but fierce. Maybe this time, I'd learned to be enough for myself first. The afternoon sun filtered weakly through the blinds, casting lazy stripes across the cramped cafe where I'd agreed to meet Emily. The place buzzed quietly with the low hum of conversations and the occasional clink of cups. But around our table, the noise seemed to fade into a thick, uncomfortable silence. I sat with my hands wrapped around a lukewarm mug, feeling the rough ceramic burn my palms, a small, grounding sensation amidst the storm inside me. Emily arrived a few minutes late, her eyes tired but sharper than I remembered. She slid into the seat opposite me without a word, and for a moment, we just looked at each other, the air between us heavy with everything left unsaid. Her perfume was muted now, less a mask, more a trace, like a ghost of the past trying not to overwhelm the present. I swallowed hard, trying to find the words that wouldn't come. "Why now?" I finally asked, voice rough. "After all this time, after everything." She bit her lip, glancing away toward the window as a group of teenagers laughed nearby, oblivious to the tension at our table. "Because I owe you the truth," she said quietly, almost too softly to hear. "Not the stories I told you, not the half-truths we both lived with. The real truth." The words hit me with a dull ache. No dramatic reveal, no sudden confession. Just this quiet promise that maybe, finally, something honest would break through. I nodded, heart thudding unevenly. "Okay, I'm listening." Emily took a deep breath, fingers tracing the rim of her empty cup. "The man I left you for, he's not who you think. The money, the status, it's all a front. A dangerous game he's playing, and I got caught in it. I thought I could change things, that I could make it work. But it's not just about surviving anymore. It's about control, fear, and things I'm not proud of." Her eyes met mine, and I saw the flicker of vulnerability beneath the guarded surface. "I never wanted to hurt you, Jake. But I was scared. Scared of failing. Scared of being stuck. My family pushed me hard, and I pushed back in the worst way. The silence that followed was thick, neither of us rushing to fill it. My mind reeled with the pieces falling into place, the lies, the distance, the warnings I'd ignored. I wanted to ask more, to demand explanations, but the words tangled in my throat. Instead, I said, "You should have trusted me. We could have faced it together. She shook her head, a sad smile flickering. Maybe. But I wasn't ready. And maybe I'm still not. The conversation stalled, awkward and raw, like two strangers trying to navigate a broken bridge. Our eyes darted away, fingers fidgeted, and the seconds stretched out longer than either of us wanted. There was no closure here, no neat ending or reconciliation. But beneath the discomfort, a fragile honesty took root. As I stood to leave, the weight I'd carried for months felt a little lighter, not gone, but shifted. Emily's voice stopped me with one last, hesitant sentence. "I'm sorry, Jake, for everything." I nodded, the words catching between us like a fragile truce. Outside, the city moved on, indifferent and relentless. And in that small, imperfect moment, I realized some truths don't fix everything. They just set us free to carry the pieces in our own way. The days that followed our cafe meeting unfolded in a quiet, uneven rhythm, like the first tentative steps of someone learning to walk again after a long fall. I found myself waking earlier than usual. The silence in the apartment no longer oppressive, but something I could almost breathe in without flinching. I began making coffee not out of habit or routine, but as a small act of grounding, watching the steam curl upward in lazy spirals, a fragile comfort in the stillness. Work became a strange refuge. I noticed how I started answering emails with a little more patience, how I stopped flinching when my phone buzzed with a message from Emily. Not because I was eager to engage, but because I was learning to tolerate the discomfort of uncertainty. One afternoon, a text arrived simply saying, "Hope you're okay." I stared at the screen longer than I should have, then typed back, "Getting there." It was barely a conversation, but it felt like a thread connecting two separate worlds. My brother noticed the shift too. When we met for lunch, the usual teasing was replaced by quiet check-ins. He didn't push for details. Instead, he shared stories from his own struggles, reminding me, without preaching, that healing isn't linear. Those moments, brief and unassuming, became lifelines. Small reminders that I wasn't alone in navigating this mess. At home, the apartment no longer felt like a museum of broken dreams. I caught myself leaving the curtains open to let sunlight spill in, and sometimes, when I was brave enough, I sat in our spot on the couch. The coffee table was still bare, cleared of photos and unopened mail, but I left a small stack of books there, something new, something mine. One evening, a neighbor stopped by with a pie, a silent offering of kindness that I accepted with a nod and a faint smile. These micro moments of connection, so simple and quiet, began stitching a fragile new fabric around my life. But the path wasn't smooth. Some nights, the weight of everything pressed back down, and I found myself pacing the apartment, restless and raw. Old habits crept in, checking my phone obsessively, replaying conversations in my head, wrestling with the urge to reach out for something familiar, even if it hurt. I stumbled through these moments, reminding myself that setbacks didn't erase progress. They were part of it. Emily's messages grew less frequent, less expectant, and more reflective. There was no rush for answers or closure anymore, just a mutual space where distance and understanding coexisted uneasily. When we did talk, it was often stilted, laced with pauses and half-spoken truths. Trust was a delicate thing now, a slow reconstruction built on hesitant words and cautious listening. Family dynamics remained tangled. Her family never reached out, their silence echoing louder than any apology or explanation could. I realized that some relationships aren't meant to be repaired, at least not on our timeline or terms. Accepting that was maybe the hardest part. Yet amid the complexity, I noticed a subtle shift inside myself, a flicker of resilience that wasn't about pretending to be okay, but about embracing the messy, imperfect process of becoming whole again. It wasn't a tidy ending or a neat resolution. It was a beginning, uncertain and fragile, like the first green shoots breaking through cracked concrete. And as the days stretched forward, I held on to that possibility, not that everything would be fixed, but that I might finally be ready to move forward on my own terms, one small step at a time. Sitting on the edge of my bed, I let the quiet settle around me, not as a weight, but as something I could finally breathe with. Looking back, it's clear how much has changed, not just in my life, but inside me. The apartment that once felt like a cage now feels more like a space where I can be honest with myself, even if that honesty is uncomfortable. I think about the early days with Emily, when her smile was real and the future felt possible. Back then, I believed love could overcome everything, that if I just worked hard enough, if I was enough, it would all be okay. But I've learned that love isn't a solution to every problem. Sometimes, it's complicated by outside forces, by the expectations of others, and by the ways we try to protect ourselves, even if it means hurting the ones we care about most. Her family's judgment wasn't just about money or status. It was about the stories we tell ourselves about who deserves what. I felt those stories tearing us apart. But in the end, they also pushed me to see my own worth beyond their narrow definitions. I lost a relationship, yes, but I found parts of myself I didn't know I was missing. I've come to understand that healing isn't about forgetting or pretending the past didn't hurt. It's about facing that pain head-on and deciding what to do with it. Some wounds are still raw, and that's okay. Some connections have been mended, others quietly released. I don't have all the answers, but I'm starting to set boundaries that protect my peace, not just my pride. What surprised me most was realizing how much strength it takes to let go. Not just of someone else, but of the version of myself I thought I had to be. The man who was supposed to be enough for Emily and her family isn't who I'm trying to be anymore. I'm trying to be enough for me. There are still days when the silence feels loud, when the memories sneak in uninvited. But now, I meet those moments with patience instead of despair. I've learned that moving forward doesn't mean forgetting. It means making space for what's next, even if it's uncertain. So here I am, still figuring it out, still standing in the middle of this messy, real life. And maybe that's what matters most. Not the endings we imagine, but the courage to keep going when the story doesn't go the way we hoped. Have you ever faced a moment when someone you cared for left because you weren't enough? How did you find your way back? I'd love to hear your stories. Please share them in the comments.